The crystal chandelier cast fractured rainbows across the marble floor of Lumière Restaurant as Victoria Chen adjusted her black apron for the third time in 10 minutes. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from nervousness about serving the evening's most demanding tables, but from the weight of the leather portfolio hidden beneath her staff locker. Inside lay documents that could reshape the city's skyline. Acquisition papers worth $47 million, and the keys to a tech empire she'd built in shadows, while the world believed her to be nothing more than another struggling waitress. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she stood, polishing wine glasses in Manhattan's most exclusive dining establishment, while her encrypted phone buzzed with messages from venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. Victoria had spent 3 years perfecting this double life, using her evening shifts at Lumière to study the city's power players up close, their weaknesses, their tells, their casual cruelties when they believed no one important was watching. Table 12 is asking for you specifically, whispered Maria Santos, her closest friend among the staff. Maria's weathered hands bore the calluses of 20 years in service, her dark eyes reflecting both exhaustion and fierce loyalty. It's that corporate group again, the ones who never tip properly but demand everything be perfect. Victoria nodded, smoothing down her uniform. She had learned to make herself invisible in plain sight, to move through these marble corridors like a ghost observing the living. The wealthy spoke freely around service staff, revealing mergers and acquisitions, personal vendettas, and business strategies worth millions. Information was currency, and Victoria had become wealthy beyond measure, though none of these patrons would ever suspect the truth. The dining room hummed with the low conversation of New York's elite. Crystal clinked against porcelain, and the soft rustle of expensive fabric created a symphony of privilege. Victoria moved between tables with practiced grace, her trained smile never faltering even as she cataloged every conversation, every name dropped, every deal discussed over $100 steaks. As Harrison rattled off his order, demanding modifications to nearly every dish, questioning preparation methods, and generally treating the menu as a personal negotiation, Victoria's mind wandered to the phone call she'd received that afternoon. Her lawyer, David Kim, had confirmed the final papers were ready. Tomorrow, she would officially acquire controlling interest in Sterling Development, the real estate firm responsible for half of Harrison's recent projects. The man currently berating her over the temperature of his soup would wake up to find his biggest partner was now his boss. "And make sure the wine is properly chilled this time," Harrison added, his tone suggesting previous disappointments. "Last week your sommelier clearly didn't understand the difference between cellar temperature and actual cold. It's basic hospitality, something you people should know." You people. Victoria's smile never wavered, but her memory cataloged the phrase alongside dozens of others she'd collected over the months. Harrison Wells had no idea he was speaking to someone who owned 3 restaurants similar to this one, who had started in the service industry by choice rather than circumstance, who understood hospitality better than he understood human decency. As she turned to leave, Victoria caught sight of her reflection in the mirrored wall. At 28, she looked younger than her years, her angular features softened by carefully applied makeup that suggested struggle rather than success. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her uniform, deliberately chosen to blend in, gave no hint of the designer clothes hanging in her penthouse closet. The kitchen buzzed with familiar energy. Chef Raymond called out orders in rapid French, while prep cooks moved with choreographed precision. Victoria had learned to love this world, not for its glamour, which was largely an illusion, but for its honesty. In the kitchen, pretense fell away. Success was measured in perfectly cooked meals and satisfied customers, not in stock prices or market manipulation. "How's table 12 treating you?" asked James Morrison, the head bartender, as Victoria waited for Harrison's modified appetizer. James was a playwright when he wasn't mixing cocktails, his artistic soul evident in the careful attention he paid to everyone around him. He'd been the first to notice Victoria's unusual interest in the business conversations happening at the bar. "Like I'm invisible," Victoria replied, which was exactly how she preferred it. "That guy's been coming here for 2 years, never once said please or thank you. Tips exactly 15%, count it to the penny. Treats everyone like they're beneath him." Victoria nodded, unsurprised. She'd encountered countless Harrison Wells during her time at Lumière, men and women who wore their wealth like armor, believing money granted them license to diminish others. What they failed to understand was that cruelty, like kindness, had a way of circling back. The appetizer was ready, and Victoria returned to table 12 with professional efficiency. Harrison barely glanced up as she set down his plate, too engrossed in his conversation about quarterly projections and cost-cutting measures. His companions laughed at his jokes, praised his business acumen, and nodded sagely at his pronouncements about market trends. "The key to success," Harrison was telling them, "is understanding that everyone has a price. Employees, competitors, politicians, everyone can be bought or broken. It's just a matter of finding the right pressure point." Victoria poured wine with steady hands, though internally she marveled at the man's casual admission of his worldview. She'd built her fortune on the opposite principle, that trust and genuine partnership created stronger foundations than fear and manipulation. Her companies thrived because she treated employees as stakeholders, customers as partners, and competitors as opportunities for collaboration rather than conquest. The evening progressed with typical restaurant rhythm. Orders were taken, meals served, complaints handled with diplomatic grace. Victoria moved between tables, invisible and observant, collecting information and insights that would prove valuable in her other life. By the time Harrison's table reached dessert, she had overheard discussions about 3 separate business deals, 2 potential mergers, and 1 particularly ugly corporate espionage scheme. It was during coffee service that Harrison's phone rang. He answered with his usual brusque efficiency, his voice carrying across the dining room.
"Wells here. What do you mean they're not interested? I made them a generous offer." His face darkened as he listened to the response. "Find out who's behind this. Someone's been feeding them information about our Patterson acquisition. I want names." Victoria's hand remained steady as she refilled his cup, but her pulse quickened. She recognized the conversation. Harrison was trying to acquire Bennett and Associates, a small consulting firm that specialized in helping laid-off tech workers find new positions. It was exactly the kind of company that would have attracted her attention even without the Patterson connection. "I don't care what it costs," Harrison continued. "Buy them out or shut them down. I won't have some bleeding heart consultancy undermining our efficiency measures." As Victoria cleared the table, she caught fragments of Harrison's strategy. Bennett and Associates was helping Patterson's former employees find new jobs, organize legal challenges to their termination packages, and generally making Harrison's life difficult. Rather than address their legitimate concerns, he was planning to destroy them entirely. The cruelty was breathtaking in its casual efficiency. These weren't numbers on a spreadsheet. They were families, people with mortgages and medical bills and dreams for their children's futures. But Harrison spoke of ruining them the same way he might discuss the weather, his tone suggesting mild inconvenience rather than devastating human impact. Victoria had heard enough. As the evening wound down and Harrison's party prepared to leave, she retreated to the staff break room. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled out her encrypted phone and scrolled to a particular contact. "David," she said when her lawyer answered, "I need you to accelerate the Bennett acquisition. Tomorrow morning, first thing, and prepare the Sterling documentation for immediate execution." David Kim had been Victoria's attorney for 5 years, one of the few people who knew the full scope of her business empire. His voice carried concern when he replied, "Victoria, that's moving very fast. Are you sure you want to?" "I'm sure." Her voice carried steel beneath the exhaustion. "And David, I want you to set up a meeting with Harrison Wells. Tell him Victoria Chen wishes to discuss a business opportunity. Don't mention the connection to Sterling or any of the other holdings. Just Victoria Chen, private investor." There was a pause. "When do you want this meeting?" Victoria glanced at the schedule board, noting her shift assignments for the following week. Harrison would be back Thursday evening. He kept the same table every week, same time, same complaints about everything from the lighting to the temperature. "Thursday evening," she said. 7 o'clock. I'll meet here." As she ended the call, Victoria felt the familiar sensation of pieces falling into place. For 3 years, she had watched and waited, building her fortune while observing the city's power players. She'd learned their weaknesses, their fears, their petty cruelties and casual dismissals of human dignity. Now, it was time to use that knowledge. But first, she had one more shift to complete. Victoria checked her appearance in the staff room, smoothed her apron, and returned to the dining room. Harrison's table was settling their bill, his companions already reaching for their coats. She approached with the same professional smile she'd worn all evening. "Thank you for dining with us tonight," she said, presenting the check. "I hope everything was to your satisfaction." Harrison glanced up, his expression as dismissive as ever. "The service was adequate," he said, signing the receipt without looking at the total. His tip was exactly 15%, calculated to the penny. "Though I'd suggest training your staff to be less visible. Good service should be invisible."
Victoria nodded, accepting the subtle insult with practiced grace. "I'll be sure to pass along your feedback," she said, knowing this would be the last time Harrison Wells would have the opportunity to dismiss her. As the group left, chatting amongst themselves about weekend plans and upcoming business trips, Victoria began clearing their table. Crumbs from their expensive meal, wine stains on pristine white linen, the detritus of wealth carelessly consumed. She worked methodically, her mind already moving to Thursday evening and the conversation that would change everything. Maria appeared beside her, helping stack plates with efficient movements. "Rough table?" she asked, having witnessed enough of Harrison's behavior over the months. "Nothing I can't handle," Victoria replied, though her smile held a different quality now, something sharper, more purposeful. The restaurant gradually emptied as the evening wound down. Victoria completed her side work, checked in with the kitchen staff, and finally retrieved her belongings from the staff locker. The leather portfolio felt heavier tonight, weighted with possibility and approaching justice. Outside, Manhattan streets hummed with late-night energy. Traffic lights painted the pavement in red and green, and the distant sound of sirens reminded Victoria that the city never truly slept. She walked toward her apartment, a modest one-bedroom she maintained for appearances, while her mind raced through the implications of what she was about to set in motion. Harrison Wells believed he understood power, but his version was crude and temporary. Real power came from patience, from understanding, from building rather than simply acquiring. On Thursday evening, he would learn the difference between authority and true strength, between commanding respect and earning it. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from her assistant, confirming tomorrow's board meeting and the final transfer of funds for the Sterling acquisition. In less than 48 hours, she would control the real estate empire that supported Harrison's business model. The man who had spent the evening treating her like a servant would discover that his biggest partner was now his adversary. The irony was poetic, but Victoria felt no satisfaction yet, only the cold clarity of purpose. Justice delayed was not justice denied, merely justice perfected. She had waited 3 years for this moment, learning everything she could about men like Harrison Wells, understanding their weaknesses and blind spots. Thursday evening couldn't come soon enough. As Victoria reached her building, she paused to look back toward Lumière, its windows glowing warmly in the darkness. The restaurant had been her classroom, her laboratory, her stage for the greatest performance of her career. Soon the curtain would fall on this particular act, and the real show would begin. Victoria's alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., the same time it had chimed every morning for the past 3 years. Her routine was precise, carved from necessity and sharpened by discipline. She rolled out of her deliberately modest bed, feet touching the worn hardwood floors of her studio apartment, a space she maintained as carefully as any stage set, complete with unpaid bills conspicuously placed on the kitchen counter, and a wardrobe that suggested someone perpetually one paycheck away from disaster. The morning ritual began with meditation, 15 minutes of stillness that centered her before stepping into either of her two lives. As she sat cross-legged on her yoga mat, Victoria's mind drifted to the conversation she'd overheard the night before. Patterson Tech's 300 laid-off employees weren't statistics to her. She knew their names, their faces, their stories. Through her network of charitable foundations and anonymous donations, she'd been quietly helping many of them keep their homes, pay for their children's medical care, maintain dignity while searching for new employment. Harrison Wells had no idea that his cruelest business decisions were being systematically undone by the same woman he dismissed as adequate service. Victoria's phone displayed 17 missed calls from her various business managers, each message marked urgent. She scrolled through them while brewing her coffee in a machine that cost her $40 at a thrift store, though she owned commercial-grade equipment worth $10,000 in her penthouse storage unit. The juxtaposition had become second nature, living simultaneously as Victoria the struggling waitress and Victoria the anonymous mogul. The first call was from Elena Rodriguez, her real estate acquisition manager. "Victoria, we need to discuss the Sterling development timeline. Harrison Wells called an emergency board meeting this afternoon. Apparently someone leaked information about unusual activity in their stock. He's suspicious but doesn't know what he's looking for." Victoria smiled as she sipped her coffee. Harrison's paranoia was legendary, but it usually focused on competitors within his industry rather than service workers he'd never considered human enough to notice. His blindness was about to become very expensive. The second call came from Marcus Patterson himself, the elderly founder of the tech company Harrison had destroyed. Victoria had been quietly funding his legal challenge to Meridian's acquisition terms, using shell companies and anonymous donations to keep her involvement hidden. "Miss Chen," Marcus's weathered voice came through the speaker, "I wanted to thank you again for your foundation support. The lawyers you recommended found irregularities in Meridian's termination packages. We might actually have grounds for a lawsuit. My employees, former employees, might get some justice after all." Victoria's throat tightened. Marcus had no idea he was speaking to the woman who would soon control his former company's primary real estate partner, who was orchestrating a chess game that would ultimately restore much of what Harrison had stolen. The old man's gratitude was both humbling and motivating. She dressed carefully for her other life, a tailored black suit that whispered power rather than shouting it, low heels that suggested competence without intimidation, makeup that enhanced her natural features while maintaining an air of accessible authority. This version of Victoria Chen could walk into any boardroom and command immediate respect, could negotiate million-dollar deals with casual confidence, could stare down venture capitalists and make them blink first. The penthouse office she maintained under the name VC Holdings occupied the 42nd floor of a midtown tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city she was quietly conquering. Victoria arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, her assistant Marcus, a different Marcus coincidentally, already waiting with her schedule and a briefing on overnight developments. "Sterling's board voted unanimously to accept your acquisition offer," Marcus reported, his efficiency matching her own. "Harrison Wells will be informed this morning that his primary real estate partner is now under new management. Legal says he'll be contractually obligated to honor existing agreements, but new projects will require renegotiation." Victoria nodded, settling behind her desk with its view of Central Park. From here, she could see the morning joggers, the dog walkers, the ordinary people living ordinary lives without the weight of corporate responsibility or the burden of double identities. Sometimes she envied them their simplicity. "What about Bennett and Associates?" she asked, referring to the consulting firm Harrison was trying to destroy. "Acquisition completed an hour ago. They'll be folded into our Patterson Recovery Initiative. The employees Harrison was trying to silence will now have full legal support and job placement services. The irony is rather poetic." Indeed it was. Victoria had spent the early morning hours purchasing the very company Harrison planned to crush, transforming his weapon into her shield. By the time he realized what had happened, Bennett and Associates would be beyond his reach, protected by her resources and empowered to help every worker he'd discarded. The morning passed in a blur of conference calls, contract reviews, and strategic planning sessions. Victoria's business empire had grown organically, built on principles that contradicted everything Harrison represented. Where he acquired companies to strip them for parts, she bought them to strengthen and expand them. Where he laid off employees to boost quarterly profits, she invested in training and education that increased long-term value. Where he saw workers as expendable resources, she recognized them as the foundation of sustainable success. But the weight of living two lives was beginning to show. Victoria caught herself in the mirrored wall of the conference room during a particularly intense negotiation, noting the tension in her shoulders, the careful control required to switch between personas. Her therapist, Dr. Sarah Kim, who knew her only as Victoria the waitress, had warned her about the psychological toll of such extensive compartmentalization. "You're essentially living as an undercover agent," Dr. Kim had observed during their last session. "The human mind isn't designed for that kind of sustained deception, even when the deception serves a noble purpose."
Victoria had dismissed the concern at the time, but now, watching her reflection negotiate a $12 million merger while mentally preparing for her evening shift serving overpriced pasta to people who treated her like furniture, she wondered if the cost was becoming unsustainable. At 2 p.m., she excused herself from a board meeting and retreated to her private bathroom, where she began the careful transformation back into Victoria the waitress. The expensive suit was replaced by jeans and a simple sweater, the power makeup removed in favor of something suggesting long hours and financial stress. Her hair came down from its polished chignon, and she deliberately mussed it slightly, adding the kind of wear that came from double shifts and subway commutes. The woman who looked back from the mirror could have been the CEO's younger, struggling sister. Similar bone structure, but weathered by different concerns. Same intelligence, but focused on survival rather than conquest. Victoria had perfected this transformation over 3 years, learning to carry herself differently, speak with different inflections, even change her posture to suggest the accumulated weight of service work. The afternoon service at Lumière began with the usual briefing. Maria Santos pulled Victoria aside almost immediately, her expression concerned. "There's been strange activity around table 12, she whispered, referring to Harrison's usual spot. "The hostess says someone called to confirm his Thursday reservation, but they asked unusual questions, whether he typically dines alone, what time he usually arrives, whether he takes meetings during dinner." Victoria's pulse quickened. Her lawyer must have made contact, which meant Harrison was already suspicious. Good. Suspicion would make him more eager to understand what he was facing, more likely to agree to Thursday's meeting out of curiosity if nothing else. "Probably just his assistant being thorough," Victoria replied, though her mind was already racing through contingencies. If Harrison was suspicious about his dining arrangements, he might also be investigating the unusual business activity surrounding his companies. The timing would need to be perfect. The lunch service passed quietly, Victoria's movements automatic as her thoughts focused on Thursday evening.
She'd rehearsed the conversation countless times, anticipating Harrison's reactions, preparing responses to his inevitable attempts to dismiss or intimidate her. But theory and practice were different creatures. When the moment came, she would need every ounce of control she'd developed over the past 3 years. During her break, Victoria stepped outside for air and found herself face to face with an unexpected reminder of why this all mattered. Jennifer Walsh, a former Patterson Tech employee she recognized from the company holiday party 2 years ago, was walking past Lumière with her 2 young children. Jennifer looked older than Victoria remembered, her clothes suggesting the kind of careful economy that came with unexpected unemployment. "Excuse me," Jennifer called out, recognizing Victoria from some forgotten interaction. "Don't you work at Patterson? I thought I remembered you from the cafeteria." Victoria's throat went dry. She'd attended Patterson's company events as part of her research into potential investments, presenting herself as a contract worker to avoid attention. The deception had seemed harmless at the time, but now it felt like a web that might entangle her. "I did some temporary work there," Victoria replied carefully. "I heard about the layoffs. I'm sorry." Jennifer's smile was tired but genuine. "Thank you. It's been difficult, but we're managing. There's actually been some good news recently. A charitable foundation started helping with legal fees, and my husband found a new job through some consulting firm that's been helping Patterson employees. Bennett and Associates, I think? They've been amazing." Victoria nodded, her heart racing. Jennifer was describing her own work, the anonymous assistance she'd been providing through carefully constructed legal entities. The woman standing before her had been helped by Victoria the mogul while speaking to Victoria the waitress, unaware that both versions were the same person. "That's wonderful," Victoria managed. "I'm glad things are looking up." As Jennifer walked away with her children, Victoria leaned against the restaurant's brick exterior and closed her eyes. The weight of her double life felt suddenly enormous. Not just the deception, but the responsibility. Jennifer Walsh and hundreds like her were counting on assistance they couldn't trace back to its source, depending on a mysterious benefactor they would never know to thank. The afternoon service resumed, but Victoria found herself distracted, making small mistakes that drew sharp looks from the kitchen staff. Her carefully maintained personas were beginning to blur at the edges, reality becoming negotiable in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. At 4 p.m., her encrypted phone buzzed with a message from David Kim. "HW confirmed for Thursday 7 p.m. Seemed very interested when I mentioned potential real estate opportunities. He has no idea what's coming." Victoria smiled grimly as she cleared a table, her hands steady even as her pulse raced. Tomorrow would bring the sterling announcement, the revelation that Harrison's primary business partner was now under new ownership. Thursday would bring face-to-face confrontation, the moment when 3 years of careful preparation would either validate her strategy or expose her to devastating consequences. But tonight she was still Victoria the waitress, invisible and observant, learning the final lessons she would need for Thursday's performance. Harrison Wells had spent years treating people like her as disposable, never imagining that one of them might be powerful enough to strike back. His blindness was about to become very expensive indeed. The evening shift brought its usual parade of entitled customers, each believing their wealth granted them license to diminish others. Victoria served them with professional grace while mentally cataloging their weaknesses, their tells, their casual cruelties. Information was still currency, and she was still the richest person in the room. They just didn't know it yet. As closing time approached, Victoria completed her side work with methodical precision. Tomorrow would bring the first public move in her chess game with Harrison Wells. Thursday would bring revelation and reckoning, But tonight, she was content to be invisible, to polish wine glasses and clear tables, while planning the systematic dismantling of a corporate empire built on cruelty and contempt. The transformation was almost complete. Soon, Victoria Chen, the waitress, would cease to exist, her purpose fulfilled. In her place would stand Victoria Chen, the investor, the entrepreneur, the woman who had spent 3 years learning everything she needed to know about power and its proper use. Harrison Wells was about to discover the difference between authority and justice, between commanding fear and earning respect. The lesson would be expensive, comprehensive, and absolutely unforgettable.
Wednesday morning arrived with the soft gray light of winter, casting shadows across Victoria's penthouse office as she reviewed the final details of what her team had dubbed Operation Sterling. The acquisition papers lay before her like battle plans, each document representing months of careful positioning, legal maneuvering, and strategic patience. Today, Harrison Wells would wake up to discover that his business empire had shifted beneath his feet, though he wouldn't understand the full implications until Thursday evening. Elena Rodriguez appeared in her doorway at precisely 8 a.m., her expression mixing professional satisfaction with barely concealed excitement. "The Sterling board received our final offer at midnight," she reported. "Their emergency session concluded an hour ago. Unanimous acceptance. Harrison Wells will be informed within the hour that Meridian Industries' primary real estate partner is now under new ownership." Victoria nodded, feeling the familiar rush of pieces falling into place. Sterling Development owned or managed 60% of the properties housing Harrison's various businesses, office buildings, manufacturing facilities, retail spaces that generated millions in monthly revenue. Overnight, his landlord had become his adversary, though he didn't know it yet. "What about the lease renewals coming due next quarter?" Victoria asked, already knowing the answer but needing confirmation. 47 properties, including Meridian's flagship headquarters, Elena replied. "Under the previous management, automatic renewal was guaranteed. Under new ownership," she smiled, "well, let's say the terms will require significant renegotiation." Victoria's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Harrison Wells, according to the caller ID. She gestured for Elena to remain silent and answered with neutral professionalism. "Victoria Chen speaking." "Miss Chen, this is Harrison Wells, CEO of Meridian Industries." His voice carried its usual authority, though Victoria detected an undertone of confusion. "I understand you requested a meeting to discuss business opportunities. Given some unusual developments this morning, I'm particularly interested in speaking with you. Would Thursday evening still work?" "Thursday evening would be perfect," Victoria replied, keeping her tone businesslike. 7 o'clock at Lumière Restaurant. I've made reservations." There was a pause. "Lumière? That's rather public for a business meeting." Victoria smiled, though Harrison couldn't see it. "I find restaurants excellent venues for honest conversation. Less formal than boardrooms, more neutral than offices. I trust that's acceptable." "Of course," Harrison replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Should I prepare anything specific?" "Just an open mind. We have much to discuss." After ending the call, Victoria leaned back in her chair, savoring the moment. Harrison was off balance, suspicious but intrigued, exactly where she needed him. The man who had spent months treating her like invisible furniture was now eager to meet with her as an equal, or so he believed. The morning progressed with the usual parade of conference calls and strategic meetings, but Victoria's attention kept drifting to the view outside her window. Somewhere below, in the maze of Manhattan streets, people were going about their ordinary lives, commuting to jobs, grabbing coffee, rushing to appointments. Most would never know that the business decisions made in offices like hers could reshape their world overnight. At 10:30 a.m., Victoria's assistant Marcus burst through her door with barely controlled excitement. "You need to see the news," he said, pulling up a financial website on the conference room's large monitor. The screen showed Harrison standing behind a podium at Meridian's headquarters, his usually perfect composure slightly strained. Behind him, the company logo gleamed with the kind of corporate polish that suggested success and stability. illusions Victoria was systematically dismantling.
"Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison began, "I want to address recent speculation about Meridian Industries' business partnerships. This morning, we learned that Sterling Development, one of our key real estate partners, has been acquired by an investment group. This change will have no impact on our operations or our commitment to our shareholders." Victoria smiled at the lie. Harrison was already scrambling, trying to project confidence while privately panicking about the implications. Her sources within his company had reported 3 emergency board meetings since the Sterling announcement, with Harrison demanding investigations into potential corporate espionage and hostile takeover attempts. The press conference continued for another 10 minutes, Harrison fielding questions with practiced deflection while his eyes betrayed growing anxiety. When a reporter asked about rumors of workforce reductions at recently acquired companies, Harrison's mask slipped slightly. "Efficiency is the cornerstone of modern business," he said, his voice sharper. "Sentiment has no place in corporate strategy. When we acquire companies, we streamline operations to maximize shareholder value. Employment levels are secondary to profitability." Victoria felt her jaw tighten. Even under pressure, Harrison couldn't resist demonstrating the callous worldview that had made him her target. His casual dismissal of human cost would play perfectly into Thursday evening's confrontation. The afternoon brought a steady stream of intelligence from Victoria's network within Harrison's organization. His assistant had made 17 phone calls trying to identify the mysterious Victoria Chen who had requested a meeting. His security team was running background checks on anyone with that name in the New York area. His legal department was reviewing every contract and partnership agreement, searching for vulnerabilities or hostile positioning. None of them would find what they were looking for. Victoria Chen, the mogul, existed in shadows and shell companies, her true identity obscured by layers of legal protection that had taken years to construct. Harrison's investigators would find dozens of Victoria Chens in New York, but none matching the description of a serious investor worthy of CEO-level attention. By 3 p.m., Victoria needed to transition back to her other life. The transformation ritual had become second nature. Expensive suit replaced by server's uniform, power makeup exchanged for the appearance of exhaustion. Confident posture adjusted to suggest the accumulated weight of service work. In 15 minutes, she shifted from corporate predator to invisible prey, from hunter to seemingly helpless quarry. Lumiere's afternoon shift began with unusual energy. Word had spread among the staff that Thursday evening's reservations included several high-profile business figures, including Harrison Wells and an unnamed investor planning what the rumor mill suggested was a major deal. Maria Santos pulled Victoria aside during prep work, her expression concerned. "That investor meeting tomorrow night, the hostess says Harrison Wells specifically requested you as his server. That's unusual. He normally doesn't care who serves his table." Victoria's pulse quickened. Harrison was already trying to control the environment, to ensure familiar faces surrounded him during what he sensed might be an ambush. His request to have her serve the meeting was both flattering and dangerous. It suggested he'd noticed her presence enough to find it comfortable, while also placing her directly in the line of fire when his world shifted beneath him. "Did he say why?" asked Victoria, though she suspected the answer. "Just that you understood his preferences," Maria replied. "Though between us, I think he's more nervous than he wants to admit. His assistant called 3 times today to confirm details, table location, lighting, even the temperature of the dining room." Victoria nodded, filing away this intelligence. Harrison's anxiety was growing, his legendary control beginning to fray at the edges. Good. Uncertainty would make him more susceptible to the revelations coming Thursday evening. The afternoon service passed quietly, but Victoria noticed subtle changes in the restaurant's atmosphere. The hostess was more deferential to arriving guests, the sommelier spent extra time perfecting wine presentations, and even Chef Raymond emerged from the kitchen twice to personally oversee dish preparation. Lumière was preparing for tomorrow evening's performance, though none of the staff understood the true nature of the drama about to unfold. During her break, Victoria stepped outside for air and found herself thinking about Jennifer Walsh, the former Patterson Tech employee she'd encountered the day before. Jennifer represented hundreds of people affected by Harrison's business decisions, families disrupted by his ruthless efficiency calculations. Tomorrow evening wasn't just about corporate
vengeance. It was about justice for everyone Harrison had casually destroyed in pursuit of shareholder value. Her encrypted phone buzzed with a message from Marcus Patterson, the elderly tech founder whose company Harrison had dismantled. "Miss Chen, I wanted to update you on our legal progress. Bennett and Associates found irregularities in Meridian's acquisition paperwork. We might be able to challenge the entire deal. Your foundation's support has made all the difference." Victoria smiled grimly. Marcus had no idea that Bennett and Associates was now her company, that the legal challenge he described was part of a larger strategy to systematically dismantle Harrison's empire. The old man's gratitude was both humbling and motivating, a reminder that tomorrow evening's confrontation had stakes beyond personal satisfaction. The evening shift brought Harrison himself, arriving for his weekly dinner with the usual entourage of executives and their wives. Victoria approached table 12 with professional composure, though her heart raced as she prepared for what might be their final interaction as server and customer. "Good evening, Mr. Wells," she said, her voice steady. "Are you ready to order?" Harrison glanced up, his gray eyes more assessing than usual. He seemed to study her face, as if trying to place her in some broader context. The scrutiny lasted several seconds before he nodded. "The usual. And make sure everything's perfect tomorrow evening. I'm hosting an important business meeting." "Of course," Victoria replied. "I'll personally ensure everything meets your standards." As she turned to go, Harrison called her back. "What's your name again?" Victoria felt her breath catch slightly, but maintained her composure. "Victoria, sir." "Victoria," Harrison repeated as if testing the sound. "Interesting coincidence. The investor I'm meeting tomorrow has the same name, Victoria Chen." He paused, studying her face again. "Any relation?" Victoria's training in deception served her well. She allowed confusion to cross her features, followed by a self-deprecating smile. "I wish, sir. I imagine she's considerably more successful than I am." Harrison's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Indeed. Well, make sure you're working tomorrow evening. I want familiar faces around during important meetings." "I'll be here," Victoria promised, the words carrying more weight than Harrison could possibly understand. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of professional service and careful observation. Harrison's conversation revealed growing anxiety about the Sterling acquisition, speculation about potential hostile takeovers, and increasingly paranoid theories about corporate espionage. His companions offered reassurance and tactical advice, unaware that their every word was being cataloged by the woman refilling their water glasses. As the evening wound down and Harrison's party prepared to leave, Victoria felt the familiar sensation of wheels in motion. Tomorrow would bring the final pieces of her strategy into alignment. Thursday evening would bring revelation, confrontation, and the systematic dismantling of Harrison Wells' empire of cruelty. But tonight, she was still invisible, still underestimated, still gathering the intelligence she would need for the performance of her lifetime. Harrison Wells had no idea that he'd just made dinner reservations with his own destruction. The transformation was accelerating now. Victoria Chen, the waitress, gradually giving way to Victoria Chen, the architect of justice. Soon, the illusion would shatter completely, and Harrison would discover the true cost of treating human beings as disposable assets. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. At closing time, Victoria completed her duties with meticulous care. knowing this might be her final shift as a server. Tomorrow evening, everything would change. The woman who had spent 3 years learning the secrets of New York's power elite while pretending to be their servant was about to step into the light. Harrison Wells was about to learn that invisibility and powerlessness were very different things, and that the woman he dismissed as adequate service was neither invisible nor powerless. She was patient, strategic, and absolutely committed to justice. The reckoning was 24 hours away. Thursday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of winter day that made Manhattan's skyline gleam like polished steel. Victoria stood at her penthouse windows, watching the city wake up beneath her, and felt the weight of approaching transformation. Today, she would make her final moves as the mysterious investor. Tonight, she would reveal herself as something far more dangerous than Harrison Wells had ever imagined. Her morning briefing with Elena Rodriguez confirmed that Harrison's panic was intensifying. Meridian stock had dropped 3% overnight as rumors of the Sterling acquisition spread through financial circles. More significantly, Harrison had spent the previous evening calling in favors, trying to identify the mysterious VC holdings that now controlled his real estate partnerships. "His people are getting close," Elena warned. "They've traced some of our shell companies back to offshore accounts. Nothing that leads directly to you, but they're asking the right questions." Victoria nodded. She'd expected this level of investigation. Harrison hadn't built a corporate empire without developing sophisticated intelligence capabilities. But her own network was deeper, older, more carefully constructed. He would find shadows and misdirection, not truth. Let him investigate. Desperation makes people careless. I want him off balance for tonight's meeting. The morning's final preparation involved a delicate balance of revelation and concealment. Victoria needed Harrison suspicious enough to take the meeting seriously, but not so panicked that he brought security or legal counsel. The goal was controlled confrontation, not corporate warfare. At 11 a.m., she made her move. Using her legitimate business identity, Victoria Chen of VC Holdings, she placed a call directly to Harrison's office. "Mr. Wells, I wanted to confirm our meeting this evening and perhaps offer some context that might interest you." "Miss Chen," Harrison replied, his voice tight with barely controlled tension, "I'm very interested in context. My research team has been having difficulty locating background information on your company." Victoria smiled. "Privacy is valuable in my business, Mr. Wells, but I can tell you that VC Holdings specializes in strategic acquisitions, companies with unrealized potential, undervalued assets, opportunities for efficiency improvements." The pause that followed stretched long enough for Victoria to count her heartbeats. When Harrison spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, recognition mixed with growing alarm. "Are you familiar with Meridian Industries' recent activities, Miss Chen?"
Intimately, Victoria replied, "including your acquisition of Patterson Tech, your partnership with Sterling Development, and your rather efficient approach to workforce management. I find your methods instructive." Another pause. "And you're interested in investment opportunities." "I'm interested in many things, Mr. Wells, particularly the gap between public reputation and private behavior. We have much to discuss tonight." As she ended the call, Victoria felt the familiar rush of perfectly executed strategy. Harrison was now fully engaged, suspicious but intrigued, committed to tonight's confrontation. He would spend the day trying to identify her true identity and intentions, but his investigations would yield only carefully planted misdirections. The afternoon shift at Lumière began with electric tension. The entire staff sensed the evening's importance, though none understood its true significance. Maria Santos pulled Victoria aside during prep, her expression mixing excitement with concern. "The investor meeting tonight has everyone nervous," she whispered. "Harrison Wells called twice to confirm details, and his assistant sent someone to inspect the private dining room. Whatever this is about, it's big." Victoria nodded, her pulse quickening. Harrison's anxiety was peaking exactly as planned. "Did they request anything specific?" "Complete privacy. No interruptions, no other tables seated nearby, and they want you as the only server. The hostess is calling it the most important reservation in the restaurant's history." As evening approached, Victoria began her final transformation. Not from mogul to waitress this time, but from hidden predator to revealed hunter. She applied her makeup with extra care, choosing a look that suggested competence without intimidation. Her hair was styled in a way that could shift from professional to approachable depending on the angle. Most importantly, she selected accessories that could be removed or adjusted to reveal different aspects of her identity as the evening progressed. The private dining room at Lumière was a study in understated elegance: mahogany paneling, crystal chandeliers, and windows overlooking the city's twinkling lights. Victoria had requested this space specifically for its symbolic value. Neutral ground where truth could be spoken without the power dynamics of corporate offices or the public scrutiny of the main dining room. At 6:45 p.m., Harrison Wells arrived with military precision, his silver hair perfectly styled, his tailored suit projecting authority and control. But Victoria noticed subtle tells: the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes swept the room searching for threats or advantages, the careful positioning of his phone and briefcase that suggested preparation for rapid communication or escape. "Good evening, Mr. Wells," Victoria said, approaching with professional composure. "Miss Chen will be with you shortly. Can I offer you something while you wait?" Harrison's eyes fixed on her face with sudden intensity. "Victoria, the waitress with the same name as my mysterious investor. What an interesting coincidence." Victoria felt her heart rate spike but maintained her neutral expression. "Would you like me to send someone else to serve you this evening?" "No," Harrison replied, his voice thoughtful. "I think you're exactly who should be here tonight." At precisely 7 p.m., Victoria excused herself from the dining room and made her way to Lumière's staff area. In the manager's office, she began the most important transformation of her life: removing her server's apron, adjusting her hair and makeup, and retrieving the briefcase she'd hidden that morning. When she looked in the mirror, the woman staring back at her was someone Harrison Wells had never seen before: confident, powerful, and absolutely committed to justice.
Victoria Chen, the waitress, was gone. In her place stood Victoria Chen, the investor, the architect of Harrison's systematic downfall, the woman who had spent 3 years learning everything she needed to destroy him. She walked back toward the private dining room, her steps measured and purposeful. Through the window, she could see Harrison checking his phone, probably trying to reach his mysterious dinner companion. His investigation team would have spent the day chasing shadows and false leads, never suspecting that the truth had been serving his table for months. Victoria paused outside the dining room door, taking a deep breath to center herself. In a few moments, she would step inside and shatter Harrison Wells's understanding of power, control, and consequences. The man who had built an empire on cruelty and dismissal was about to learn that every action had an equal and opposite reaction, and some reactions took years to manifest. She opened the door and stepped inside, her presence immediately commanding the space in a way that made Harrison's head snap up from his phone. For a moment, confusion flickered across his features as his brain struggled to process what he was seeing. "Good evening, Mr. Wells," Victoria said, her voice carrying the authority he'd never heard from her before. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I believe we have quite a lot to discuss." Harrison's face went through a rapid sequence of expressions: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally the dawning realization that he had been outmaneuvered by someone he'd never considered worthy of notice. "You," he said,
his voice barely above a whisper. "You're Victoria Chen." "I am indeed," Victoria replied, settling into the chair across from him with the confidence of someone who controlled every aspect of the evening ahead. "And you, Mr. Wells, are about to learn the true cost of treating people as invisible." The game had begun, and Harrison Wells was already 3 moves behind. The silence that followed Victoria's revelation stretched like a taut wire between them, filled with the weight of 3 years' worth of careful planning finally coming to fruition. Harrison Wells sat frozen in his chair, his usually sharp gray eyes wide with disbelief, as his mind struggled to reconcile the confident woman before him with the invisible waitress who had been serving his table for months. "This is impossible," he finally managed, his voice hoarse. You work here. You're nobody." Victoria smiled, the expression cold and precise. "I do work here, Mr. Wells, but I work many places. Tonight, however, I'm here as Victoria Chen of VC Holdings, the company that now owns Sterling Development, your primary real estate partner." She opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "I believe these documents will clarify our new relationship." Harrison's hands shook slightly as he reached for the papers, his legendary composure cracking like ice under pressure. Victoria watched his face as he scanned the acquisition documents, the lease agreements, the transfer of ownership papers that had shifted the foundation of his business empire while he'd been dismissing her as adequate service. "Sterling Development," he read aloud, his voice growing stronger as corporate instincts overrode personal shock. "Purchased yesterday by VC Holdings for $47 million. His eyes snapped up to meet hers. "You bought my landlord." "I bought your landlord, along with controlling interests in 3 of your suppliers, 2 of your distribution partners, and Bennett & Associates, the consulting firm you were planning to destroy this week." Harrison's face flushed deep red. "Bennett & Associates? That bleeding heart operation helping Patterson Tech's employees?" "Those employees you fired," Victoria corrected, her voice sharp. 300 families you destroyed in pursuit of quarterly efficiency. Bennett & Associates is now part of my Patterson Recovery Initiative, dedicated to helping every worker you have discarded find new employment and legal recourse for improper termination. The corporate executive in Harrison was rallying, pushing aside personal humiliation in favor of damage control. He leaned forward, his voice taking on the commanding tone she'd heard him use with subordinates. "What do you want? Money? A buyout? Partnership terms?" Victoria's laugh was soft but merciless. "You still don't understand, do you? This isn't a negotiation, Mr. Wells. This is a reckoning." She withdrew another document from her briefcase, a photograph taken at Patterson Tech's final company party, showing Harrison shaking hands with Marcus Patterson, while Victoria, in her contractor disguise, stood visible in the background. "I was there when you made your speech about efficiency optimization. I watched you smile at Marcus Patterson while planning to destroy his life's work. I've been watching you for 3 years, learning everything I needed to know about your business practices and your character." Harrison stared at the photograph, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly as the implications sunk in. "You've been spying on me?" "I've been serving you dinner," Victoria corrected, "every Thursday for 18 months, watching you discuss business deals, listening to you describe human beings as expendable resources, observing your casual cruelty toward anyone you considered beneath your notice." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Did you know you've personally insulted me 47 times? I kept count." The blood was draining from Harrison's face now, his earlier flush replaced with ashen realization. "The Patterson acquisition. You knew about it in advance." "I knew about all of them," Victoria replied. Your acquisition strategy relies on information asymmetry, buying companies before their value becomes apparent to other investors. But information flows in multiple directions, Mr. Wells. Your dinner conversations provided excellent intelligence about target companies, timing, and negotiation strategies. Harrison's phone buzzed with an incoming call, but he ignored it, his attention fixed on Victoria with the intensity of a man watching his world collapse in real time. "How long have you been planning this?" Victoria considered the question, mentally tracing back through years of careful preparation and strategic positioning. 3 years of active planning, 7 years of building the resources and network necessary to execute it. But really, Mr. Wells, you planned this yourself the moment you decided that human dignity was less important than shareholder returns. The door to the private dining room opened and Maria Santos appeared with a bottle of wine. She approached the table with her usual professional grace, then stopped short as she noticed the tension between Victoria and Harrison. "I apologize for the interruption. Should I come back later?" Victoria turned to her friend with genuine warmth, the first soft expression she'd shown all evening. "Maria, I'd like you to meet the real Victoria Chen. I own this restaurant along with 3 others in the city. You've been working for me for 2 years, though I've never been able to tell you until now." Maria's hands went to her mouth in shock, the wine bottle nearly slipping from her grasp. "Victoria, you... what?" "I bought Lumière 18 months ago," Victoria explained gently. "Not to change anything about how it operates, but to ensure the staff was treated fairly and paid living wages. Your recent raise wasn't from the previous owner, it was from me." Harrison watched this exchange with growing horror, dawning in his eyes. "You own the restaurant. You've been playing a role for years." "Not playing," Victoria corrected, turning back to him. "Working, learning, understanding exactly how men like you think and operate when they believe no one important is watching." She gestured to Maria, who was still standing in stunned silence. "Maria, you remember Mr. Wells' comment last month about training staff to be less visible?" Maria nodded slowly, her eyes moving between Victoria and Harrison with growing understanding. "He suggested," Victoria continued, her voice growing harder, "that good service should be invisible, that people like you, like me as far as he knew, should simply disappear into the background while important people conducted important business." Harrison's voice was barely audible. "You heard that?" "I heard everything," Victoria replied, returning to receipt. "Every casual dismissal, every cruel observation, every moment when you demonstrated your belief that wealth grants license to
diminish others." She opened another folder, this one thick with transcripts and recordings. "I documented it all." Maria excused herself quietly, leaving the 2 of them alone again. Victoria could see her friend through the window, talking rapidly to other staff members, probably trying to process the revelation that the colleague she'd worked beside for years was actually their employer. Harrison was studying the transcripts now, his face cycling through expressions of anger, embarrassment, and growing panic. "This is industrial espionage, corporate surveillance. I could have you arrested." "For what?" Victoria asked calmly. "Taking orders? Serving food? Overhearing conversations that took place in public spaces?" She smiled. "I'm a businesswoman who worked part-time as a waitress while building my investment portfolio. Everything I learned about your operations came from information you volunteered in restaurants, corporate events, and industry conferences. Nothing illegal about that." Harrison's phone buzzed again, and this time he answered it. "What?" he barked, his composure finally cracking completely. Victoria could hear a panicked voice on the other end, probably his assistant or legal counsel, but couldn't make out the words. "What do you mean the building lease is under review?" Harrison's voice rose sharply. "Sterling can't just..."
Yes, I know they were acquired. I'm handling it." He ended the call and fixed Victoria with a look of pure hatred. "You're trying to force me out of my own headquarters." "Your lease expires in 60 days, Victoria replied matter-of-factly. The previous Sterling management had agreed to automatic renewal at current rates. The new management feels that terms should reflect current market conditions and current tenant behavior." "What does that mean?" Victoria opened yet another folder, this one containing photographs and documentation that made Harrison's face go pale. "It means I've been documenting your company's treatment of service workers, vendors, and support staff, illegal wage theft at your manufacturing facilities, sexual harassment cover-ups in your corporate offices, environmental violations at 3 separate locations." She spread the documents across the table like playing cards. "Your lease renewal will require compliance with new ethical standards that I'm quite certain Meridian Industries cannot meet." Harrison stared at the evidence of his company's various crimes and misdemeanors, his breath coming in short gasps. "You can't... This would destroy everything I've built." "Everything you stolen, you mean," Victoria corrected. "Every shortcut, every corner cut at employee expense, every regulation ignored to boost quarterly profits. I'm not destroying your empire, Mr. Wells. I'm simply removing the support structures that allowed it to exist." The door opened again, and this time it was Marcus Patterson himself, the elderly tech founder whom Harrison had destroyed months earlier. Victoria had arranged his presence carefully, knowing that seeing his victim face to face would complete Harrison's humiliation. "Victoria," Marcus said warmly, embracing her like a granddaughter. "Thank you for inviting me tonight. I wanted to thank Mr. Wells personally for the valuable lessons he's taught me about resilience." Harrison's face was ashen now, his legendary control completely shattered. "Patterson? How do you know her?" Marcus smiled, the expression containing more dignity than Harrison had shown in his entire corporate career. "Victoria's foundation has been supporting my legal challenge to your acquisition. Thanks to her resources and Bennett & Associates' expertise, we've uncovered enough irregularities in your paperwork to reverse the entire sale." He paused, studying Harrison's stricken expression. "My company will be returned to employee ownership within the month, and every worker you fired will be invited back at higher wages than you ever paid them."
Victoria watched Harrison process this final blow, his empire of efficiency crumbling around him like a house built on sand. Patterson Tech restored, his workforce protected, his real estate partnerships compromised, his corporate headquarters at risk, the systematic demolition of everything he'd considered permanent. "Why?" Harrison whispered, the single word carrying the weight of complete defeat. "Why go to all this trouble? I never even knew you existed until tonight." Victoria's expression softened slightly, not with sympathy, but with something approaching pity. "That's exactly the problem, Mr. Wells. You never knew I existed because you never considered that I might matter. For 3 years, I served your table, heard your conversations, watched you make decisions that destroyed hundreds of lives, and you never once saw me as a human being worth noticing." She stood, gathering her documents back into their folders. "You asked what I want. I want you to understand that every person you've dismissed as invisible has a story, dreams, dignity, and value. I want you to recognize that cruelty has consequences, even when those consequences take years to manifest." She paused at the door, turning back to deliver her final words.
I want you to learn that power built on contempt for others is no power at all." As Victoria left the dining room, she could hear Harrison's voice behind her, making frantic phone calls to lawyers, advisors, anyone who might help him salvage his collapsing empire. But the calls would yield nothing. She'd spent 3 years ensuring that every support system, every safety net, every backup plan had been systematically compromised. In the main dining room, the staff was buzzing with excitement and confusion as word of Victoria's true identity spread. Maria Santos approached her with tears in her eyes. "Victoria, I don't understand. You own all of this?" Victoria embraced her friend gently. "I own the building and the business, yes, but this place belongs to all of us, to everyone who works here, who cares about treating people with dignity and respect. Nothing will change, except that you'll never have to worry about unfair treatment or inadequate wages again." As the evening wound down, Victoria stood in the restaurant's kitchen, watching her staff, her employees, her friends, process the revelation that had transformed their workplace overnight. Tomorrow, there would be interviews, legal proceedings, and the complex work of rebuilding the systems Harrison Wells had corrupted. But tonight, justice had finally found its voice. Harrison Wells would survive this encounter, she knew. Men like him always found ways to land on their feet, to reinvent themselves, to shift blame and responsibility onto others. But his empire of casual cruelty was finished. His ability to treat human beings as disposable resources permanently compromised. Victoria Chen, the waitress, had disappeared forever, her purpose fulfilled. In her place stood Victoria Chen, the architect of accountability, the woman who had proved that invisible didn't mean powerless, and that patience was the most dangerous weapon of all. The reckoning was complete, but the real work was just beginning.
Angels in disguise. Sometimes justice wears the uniform of invisible servants who see everything and forget nothing. Victoria smiled from her position near the back of the room, still adjusting to being seen rather than invisible. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of revelation, legal proceedings, and systematic reconstruction of the systems Harrison had corrupted. Every day brought new discoveries about the scope of Meridian's misconduct, and every day brought new opportunities to repair the damage. The employee restoration had been the easiest part. Victoria's team had contacted each of the 300 workers Harrison had terminated, offering not just their old jobs back, but improved positions with better benefits, higher wages, and actual respect for their contributions. The response had been overwhelming. Tears of relief, gratitude that sometimes embarrassed Victoria with its intensity, and a renewed commitment to the company's mission that transformed the workplace culture overnight. Jennifer Walsh, the mother Victoria had encountered outside Lumière, now served as Patterson Tech's new director of employee relations. During their first official meeting, Jennifer had looked across the conference table with wonder and recognition. "I knew there was something different about you that day," she'd said. "The way you really listened when I talked about the layoffs, like you understood the human cost in a way most people don't. I should have realized you were more than just another service worker." "I was exactly a service worker. That's what you're not understanding. The work I did at Lumière wasn't an act or a disguise. It was real labor, real service, real human interaction. The only difference was that I chose to do it rather than being forced by economic necessity." The distinction mattered more than Victoria had initially realized. As news of her story spread through social media and business publications, the narrative threatened to become a simple tale of wealth disguised as poverty, missing the deeper point about dignity and respect in all forms of work. Victoria had spent considerable time in interviews emphasizing that service work was valuable in its own right, not just as a stepping stone to something supposedly better. This morning's board meeting at Patterson Tech was part of a larger transformation. Victoria had structured the company's return to employee ownership as a cooperative model, with workers holding equity stakes and decision-making power. Marcus Patterson remained as chairman and spiritual leader, but the actual governance was distributed among the people who did the daily work of innovation and creation. The model was revolutionary in Silicon Valley, where hierarchy and venture capital typically controlled everything. But Victoria's experiment was proving that different approaches were not just possible, but profitable. Patterson Tech's productivity had increased 40% in 3 weeks. Absenteeism had dropped to near zero, and employee satisfaction surveys showed numbers that made traditional HR departments weep with envy. After the meeting, Victoria walked through Patterson Tech's open-plan workspace, observing the energy and collaboration that flowed when people felt valued and heard. Engineers huddled around whiteboards filled with complex algorithms, while customer service representatives worked directly with design teams to incorporate user feedback into product development. The integration was seamless, organic, and powerfully effective. Victoria called David Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, one of the senior software developers who had been with Patterson Tech for 8 years before Harrison's acquisition and layoffs. I wanted to show you what we've accomplished with the new accessibility features. Victoria spent the next hour learning about innovations that emerged when companies prioritized human need over shareholder returns. The accessibility software David's team had developed would help disabled veterans navigate technology more effectively. Exactly the kind of project Marcus Patterson had dreamed of, but couldn't fund under Harrison's efficiency-focused ownership. "This is what we always wanted to build," David explained, his enthusiasm infectious. But under Meridian, we were constantly pressured to focus on features that generated immediate revenue rather than long-term social impact. Now we can actually pursue the work that matters. As Victoria prepared to leave Patterson Tech for her next appointment, Marcus caught her in the lobby. The elderly founder looked decades younger than he had 3 weeks ago, his shoulders straight, his eyes bright with renewed purpose.
"I need to ask you something that's been bothering me," he said. "Why did you choose to help us? You could have used your wealth and influence in countless ways. Why focus on the casualties of Harrison Wells's business empire?" Victoria considered the question, one she'd been asking herself as the scope of her intervention became clear. "I suppose it started with pattern recognition," she replied. "At Lumière, I served tables for wealthy executives every night, listening to their conversations about acquisitions, layoffs, and efficiency improvements. I began to see how their decisions rippled outward, affecting families and communities they never bothered to consider." She paused, watching through the windows as Patterson Tech employees headed home to families who no longer worried about making rent or affording their children's medical care. But it became personal when I realized that invisibility and powerlessness aren't the same thing. Harrison Wells and executives like him dismiss service workers, administrative assistants, cleaning staff, anyone they consider below them in some imaginary hierarchy. They never consider that those invisible people might be listening, learning, and planning. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "You turned their blindness into their weakness." "Their blindness was always their weakness," Victoria corrected. "I just helped them discover it." The afternoon brought Victoria to Lumière, where the revelation of her true identity had transformed the restaurant's culture in ways she was still discovering. The staff now understood that their mysterious owner was someone who genuinely valued their work, having done it herself for years. The result was a level of service and workplace satisfaction that attracted customers and talent from across the city. Maria Santos had been promoted to assistant manager,
a role that utilized her 2 decades of hospitality experience while providing the respect and compensation she'd always deserved. This afternoon, she was training new servers in the restaurant's evolving philosophy of dignified service. The key, Maria was telling her trainees, is remembering that everyone who walks through these doors has a story, dreams, struggles, and dignity that deserves respect. Whether they're billionaires or struggling artists, whether they tip generously or barely at all, whether they treat us kindly or rudely, our job is to provide excellent service while maintaining our own self-respect. Victoria watched the training session from the kitchen, marveling at how profoundly the workplace culture had shifted. The same work was being done, orders taken, meals served, tables cleared, but the underlying relationships had been transformed by recognition that all labor had value and all workers deserved dignity. Chef Raymond appeared beside her, wiping his hands on his apron after completing the lunch service. "The staff is asking if you'll address them at tonight's team meeting," he said. "They want to understand what happens next now that everyone knows you're the owner." Victoria nodded. The transition period was delicate. She needed to maintain the collaborative culture that had made Lumière special while acknowledging her role as owner and ultimate decision-maker. The balance required constant attention and genuine respect for the insights of people who understood hospitality in ways she was still learning. The evening team meeting took place in Lumière's private dining room, the same space where she'd confronted Harrison Wells 3 weeks earlier. The symbolic significance wasn't lost on anyone. This was where truth had finally been spoken, where years of careful planning had yielded justice for countless people. "I know this transition has been confusing," Victoria began, addressing the assembled staff. "For years, you've known me as a colleague, someone who worked the same shifts, dealt with the same difficult customers, faced the same challenges you face every day. Now you're being told I'm the owner, that I've been wealthy all along, and I imagined some of you were wondering what was real and what was performance."
"Everything was real," Victoria continued, her voice carrying absolute conviction. "The work I did here, the relationships I built, the respect I developed for this industry and for all of you, none of that was pretense. I worked these shifts because I chose to, because I believed service work was valuable, and because I needed to understand power dynamics from the perspective of people society treats as invisible." She stood, moving closer to the assembled staff. "The only difference between then and now is that you know I had other options. But every conversation we shared, every difficult customer we handled together, every moment of frustration or triumph, those experiences were as real for me as they were for you." James Morrison, the bartender-playwright, raised his hand. "What happens now? Do we still call you Victoria? Do we treat you like a boss or like a colleague?" Victoria smiled at the question, recognizing its underlying anxiety. "You call me Victoria because that's who I am. You treat me like someone who respects your expertise and values your input, because that's how I've always tried to treat you. The only thing that changes is that now you know your job security doesn't depend on the whims of distant corporate owners. It depends on our collective success as a team." The questions continued for another hour, touching on everything from wage structures to workplace policies to the future direction of the restaurant. Victoria answered each inquiry with transparency and genuine consideration, building trust through honest communication about her intentions and expectations. As the meeting wound down, Maria approached with a thoughtful expression. "Victoria, there's something I need to tell you. Last week, before we knew about all this, I was complaining to my husband about how difficult some customers were. I said I wished the owner would spend one day working as a server just to understand what we go through." Victoria laughed, the sound carrying both amusement and irony. "I think I can safely say the owner understands what you go through." "That's what I realized. You didn't just understand our work intellectually, you lived it. You know what it feels like to smile politely while someone treats you like furniture. You understand the physical exhaustion, the emotional labor, the way difficult customers can affect your entire mood." She paused, her expression growing serious. "That's why this feels different from other workplace changes. You're not implementing policies from an office upstairs. You're improving conditions based on personal experience." The insight was profound, and Victoria realized that Maria had articulated something she'd been struggling to express. The traditional model of business ownership created artificial hierarchies that separated decision-makers from the consequences of their decisions. By working alongside the people affected by her policies, Victoria had gained insights that no boardroom discussion could provide. Later that evening, Victoria stood on the roof deck of her penthouse, looking out over the city that had become her chessboard and her laboratory. 3 weeks ago, she'd been invisible to people like Harrison Wells, dismissed as irrelevant furniture in the background of their important lives. Tonight, she was featured on the cover of 3 business magazines, profiled in major newspapers, and invited to speak at conferences about innovative management practices. The transformation was surreal, but Victoria remained focused on the deeper purpose. Harrison Wells had been neutralized, his company struggling under investigation, his reputation destroyed, his ability to harm vulnerable workers permanently compromised. But he was just one symptom of a larger disease, and Victoria's work was far from finished. Her phone buzzed with a message from Elena Rodriguez. 3 more companies have reached out about adopting the Patterson Tech cooperative model. Also, the documentary crew wants to schedule interviews for next week. Your story is inspiring broader changes. Victoria smiled at the message, though she felt the weight of increased visibility and responsibility. She'd never intended to become a public figure or a symbol of workplace justice. Her goal had been much narrower: stopping one cruel executive from harming more innocent people. But stories—
Victoria smiled, recognizing that her story had evolved beyond personal vengeance into something far more significant. The documentary requests, speaking engagements, and business inquiries represented opportunities to transform entire industries, not just individual companies. 6 months later, Victoria stood before a congressional committee investigating corporate labor practices. Harrison Wells sat 3 tables away, his empire reduced to a single struggling subsidiary, his reputation destroyed by revelations of systematic worker exploitation. He avoided her gaze, but Victoria felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only resolve to prevent others from following his path. "The solution isn't complicated," she told the assembled senators. "Treat workers as human beings with dignity, value, and voices. Listen to the people who understand your business from the ground up. Recognize that sustainable success comes from building up rather than breaking down." Behind her in the gallery sat Maria Santos, Marcus Patterson, Jennifer Walsh, and dozens of other workers whose lives had been transformed by Victoria's intervention. They represented thousands more across the country, invisible people who kept the economy functioning while being dismissed by those in power. The committee chairman leaned forward. "Miss Chen, what would you say to other business leaders about the lessons of your experience?" Victoria glanced back at her friends, drawing strength from their presence. "I'd say that invisibility is not powerlessness. Every person you dismiss as unimportant is watching, learning, and remembering. Every casual cruelty has consequences, even when those consequences take years to manifest. The choice is simple: build your success on respect and collaboration, or watch it crumble when justice finally finds its voice." As she left the hearing room, Victoria reflected on the journey from invisible waitress to visible advocate. The transformation was complete, but the work would never end. In boardrooms across America, executives were reconsidering their treatment of workers, understanding finally that the people they'd overlooked might be the most important voices in the room. The invisible had become visible, and the powerful would never be quite the same.